This podcast is part of the Shareable Podcast Network. Learn more at shareable.fm. This podcast is Shareable. I'm your host, Jeff Gibbard, commonly known as the world's most handsome strategist and professional speaker. I'm also a superhero. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single Shareable episode. And that's it. That's the intro. Short and sweet. Let's get to the show. Welcome back to Shareable. Today, my guest is Natalya Moore, who helps professional services teams do better work in half of the time. She brings a holistic work design strategy, then supercharges it with MIT's wisdom practices so teams can focus better. She's a consultant, a teacher, a speaker, and she helps you and your teams create more value in half the time with the right work design. She's really kick-ass and awesome. I've just spent a lot of time before we jumped on here looking into her, and I'm really excited to have you here. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. Equally excited.
Cool. So fill in the gaps. What didn't I cover in your introduction? Tell me more about what's your day-to-day look like? You have a super interesting, I read some of the small factoids about me sort of thing on your LinkedIn and wow, okay. All sorts of, you've been all over. Your background is very eclectic and interesting. And I want you to set the stage for people. And then we're going to dive in on a bunch of different topics. I have 3 pages of notes. Let's go.
Brilliant. So you actually pose a question in your brief sheet that says, how has technology impacted you, your work, and or your life? So I was thinking about that. So I'd like to answer that question because it does tell the story of why I'm doing what I'm doing now, which is helping teams focus better. And so I grew up in Houston, right behind Mission Control, right behind NASA Space Station, NASA Space Center. And so my neighbors were astronauts. The Challenger disaster really affected me because I swam on swim team with the son of Mike Smith. And so I grew up seeing these rockets, in fields. So space was a thing. And then I happened to, because I'm half German, half American, now Canadian as well. I grew up in Germany and the US. And, when I finished my bachelor's degree at the University of Texas, I managed to get a job at MTV Europe in Munich, Germany. And their technology, again, was interesting in its impact to work because it was the year the Berlin Wall fell down. And I was part of this team in Germany helping to launch music television in the 2 East German hotels, literally the day after that wall came down. MTV launched in 2 of the hotels on the East Side. And that was super meaningful to me because my mother escaped from East Germany when she was a child. So that whole history is also in the family. So we start out with space tech in Houston, then we go to kind of TV tech, satellites in Eastern Europe. And then the Eastern Europe journey kind of continues. I'd been a Russia buff kind of since a child. I was always interested in Russia. And I got a job in Houston that financed my MBA, being the project manager of the Soviet space exhibition as it traveled the United States. So here I am project managing this science exhibition delivered, from Moscow with real flown spacecraft, space modules, Russian spacesuits, all this stuff, and real live cosmonauts coming in and out of the exhibition to interact with the population, the audience coming to the exhibit. So I was involved in that for a couple of years. And did some other crazy things just because of this Russian-American joint venture that I was working in, like trying to sell a communication satellite to Argentina, a Russian communication satellite in Argentina. So the Russia theme continues because after I get my MBA at the University of Houston, I decide, well, first of all, I fall in love with my first husband who's half Russian, half Armenian in Houston at the University of Houston. But I always wanted to go to Russia anyway. So I'm like, okay, graduate. Yeah, move to Russia, no problem. And I got a job at Price Waterhouse as a consultant. And I kind of always say, when you don't know what to do with yourself, you become a management consultant.
Oh my God, that is so true.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm still
I went to business school. What do I do?
Yeah,
you thought about consulting? You could do anything.
And that's when the technology career started, because I ended up in the SAP implementation practice, and I ended up creating and leading a bunch of practices in Russia. I was there for 15 years, including cybersecurity, SAP, e-procurement, governance, risk and compliance. And so that leads me, so fast forward to then I get divorced. I marry a Canadian. That's why I'm in Canada. And since coming to Canada, I completely left the corporate world and began to really learn about social impact, philanthropy, nonprofit sector, and worked in tech serving that. And then COVID hit. I was rolling off a project, and I realized I'd been observing teams for the last couple of years with this tension between distraction and attention, and became fascinated by my own addiction to multitasking and all of the problems associated with that. And I'll stop there, because that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. I'm helping teams focus better so that they can harness this invisible secret asset that's more valuable than money, that nobody in the workspace is really designing for, which is attention management.
I love it. And what's really interesting about it, first of all, thank you for sharing your background. I'm always fascinated to hear people's journeys of how they get to where they are, because sometimes they're, even if it's like a circuitous route, it's like, it almost looks like a straight line. Yours is one of those ones where, if you had told me you worked, you went through all these different things and you worked for like Facebook and Google, and then you were like, I see what it's doing to our attention. Like, it would have been like a natural, like, if this, then that happened. But your experience with technology was all very much in technology that is progressing and moving humankind forward in a lot of ways. You've got space technology. You were there at the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you're there for a pivotal moment in history, and the birth of democracy in Germany on the other side of the wall. So there was a lot of things you were involved in where it was like obviously very noble ambitions and things like that. And then you come back after, the time in the corporate world and working in PricewaterhouseCoopers and the consulting, and, you come back and now you're thinking about attention and distraction, and you've probably seen that across all of the different things you did. But it's interesting how it wasn't like you did this thing where you were on the other side of it and you had a kind of a come to Jesus moment, had to be on the other side. It's more of a natural progression. So I was really fascinated as I was looking into all of your stuff, obviously about your work in attention and distraction, first and foremost, because I have attention deficit disorder and I have an immense amount of problems trying to find my focus. If I find it, if I lose it, it's like a catastrophe. And it's an idea that I've always been really fascinated with personally. And then on the other side, my background of running a social media agency, the whole purpose of the whole intent behind social media is to capture people's attention and not let it go. Right. So I was in that world of the distraction, the attention, the multitasking, and being partly the cause of it. So I'm really interested to go down the rabbit hole with you. The first part of it is I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what you mean by attention. So there's sort of the mindfulness side of attention. There is the what are the things that we are focused on that are inputs and influencing how we think about things. There's sort of like the woo-woo side of like, it can get very into that, like, pseudoscience or like mysticism or anything like that. So there's a lot of different ways that attention is being used in the discourse. I want to know exactly what you mean by it before we go down the rabbit hole.
Sure. It's a great question, because when people often interchange the words focus and attention. And when I started to dive into this, I found lots of research on all of this, but what captured my attention on the topic of attention was that attention is a function of the body, much like a circulatory system or a respiratory system. And when you think about attention is what you have. Let's say picture yourself as a unicyclist sitting on this bike.
Got it.
And you feel the heaviness of your body on the seat. It's embodied, right? And because if you lose your attention, which is not just what you're focusing on when you're riding, you have a focal point probably when you're, riding that unicycle. But if you're not centered in your body, present in the moment on that bike with that piece of tech, with that bike, you're going to fall off. And focus, in contrast to attention, is a skill and an act of will that can be trained. through mindfulness meditation and many other things. Right. So that's sort of a main difference that I like to make. Does that help?
It does. Let me ask you a question. Is that to say then attention is not a function of will? Because if you lose your attention on that unicycle seat, you fall off. So are you directing your focus to keep your attention?
Yes.
I'm trying to understand. Okay, good. I just want to make sure I'm understanding how those two things interplay.
Yes.
Okay.
Focus is directly linked because that is your act of will and your skill, because you can train it and improve it. And it impacts attention. And so that's, yeah, go ahead.
So where does distraction then come in? Is that something that interrupts attention, or is that interrupting focus, or where does that come into play? Because I know a lot of your work is about dealing with workplace distraction, team distraction, distractions of all sorts. Where does that come in? Help define that term.
So I'm not a scientist on this, and my angle on it is the workplace, because everything I've ever done since my 20s has been in the workplace with teams. And it is both. So distraction impacts our focus, and because it impacts our focus, it impacts our attention.
Got it.
But I look at the 5 elements that impact our attention in the workplace as a holistic view on how can we harness and protect this asset called attention. And attention is impacted by 5 things. And so I can go into that. That's sort of the
Don't go into that yet. I want to, there's a couple more questions I have, because I have that on my list that you put them out there, and I definitely want to go deeper into that. But I want to set up some more pieces first. When we think about attention as a function of work, and we think about the impact of what that could make, I think the natural sort of like level 1 thinking about this is like, oh, I don't want my people like spending their time on Facebook when they should be focused on work, right? Like, I think that's very much a model of like the attention issues we have at work are this. People are getting too distracted and not getting their work done, right? Then maybe there's like the level 2 where it's like, we're not necessarily focused on the most important work we could do, but it's still very much at like a day-to-day thinking. I get the sense from reading your materials that you think a little bit bigger than that. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about where attention, maybe like to make it real, like think about like professional services as like a niche to focus on. So professional services company, why does attention matter in a professional services company? And where are you looking to make that impact?
Yeah, so you've articulated exactly my target market, the knowledge worker market, or the professional services firm, which can include technology developers as well. And why that market is so important is because that market, those professionals must do a certain amount of deep work as defined by Cal Newport, right?
Yep.
To create value, to sustain their competitive advantage in the market, because they primarily think for a living. And so if we go to the pain points of this, getting back to your question on what is distraction, distraction is an umbrella pain point, or it's a symptom. And the pain points of distraction in the professional services firm or the knowledge worker community is that, one, they can't sustain advantage because well-being is going down. We've got aspirational people working hard, thinking hard, driving themselves, spending all day in Zoom meetings and doing creative work or value creation work at night and on weekends. So we've got burnout risk, and we also have the tendency to task switch all the time, because as I've been a knowledge worker my whole life, I love task switching. I get high on busyness. It gives me a dopamine hit, right? And we're encouraged to multitask. I used to hire people and ask in interviews, are you a good multitasker, right? This is terrible. So the pain points are decreased well-being, decreased innovation because we're not harnessing attention, and decreased effectiveness. Yes, that productivity stuff is there. Don't look at Facebook, but you're right. It's transactional, and that is not the whole picture.
Got it. Okay. So this feels like to me, so I ran my own agency for about 7 years, got acquired by a large agency, was there for a year and a half. I've been in agencies for a good portion of my career, most recently. And one of the things that I've seen that is I think that one of the bigger challenges to attention is this sense that everything is important, right? Like I'm a big, so have you read Essentialism by McKeon? I forget his name.
I haven't, no.
It's a great book. I feel like you would like, if you like deep work, you'll love Essentialism, but it's the idea that essentially you have to dispense with all that is unimportant and focus on the things that are most important. Like, what are you to do with this one precious life that you have, sort of thing. And in the agency world, it felt like everything is a top priority and constantly like putting out fires, feeling burned out, all that sort of stuff. And I'm curious if what you're saying, all of what you're saying made perfect sense, right? Like we don't want to be burned out, and that interrupts our well-being and like makes us not feel good. We're not as innovative if we're stretched thin. If we're multitasking, we're not paying enough attention to do deep work and creative work and good work. So why is everyone still doing it? Like literally every agency I refer to as a flaming dumpster fire, like moving at 100 miles an hour. Why is it still that way? If we know not only experientially that it's terrible, we have data, I'm sure, to support that it's not the best way. Why is it still happening? And what's the intervention that makes the most sense to start with?
Yeah. So you've touched on the point of workplace design that hits on culture. How do we design a culture that protects and harnesses this asset called attention? And when you take the flavor of culture, as you described it in digital agencies, there's this combat between, yes, everything is important, and a digital agency has the responsibility to capture attention. So these are two polarizing things. When you talk about the professional services firm, which has a little bit of a different culture, the challenge is, how do we get out of this unwritten policy in our culture that we have of instant response, that everything is important? Mm-hmm. So I work a lot with tech clients, and they say, we've got Slack on crack. We have to be in every channel internally, and then we need to respond to our clients. And somehow this unwritten rule appeared in our culture. We don't know when it appeared. No one had a meeting and said, let's just do instant response. It has just emerged. So one of the first things in culture design is tackling the question, designed for a particular team, and because different teams could have different needs for instant response, on let's come to some shared agreements, co-created shared agreements on when do we engage in instant response? What is the definition of important for a client or important internally? With an emergency room doctor, it's crystal clear. It's important. I'm here to save a life. I'm going to be focused on that. No questions asked. Maybe that's an unwritten rule, but it's a pretty clear one. In the knowledge worker space, it's very mucky and blurry. So I don't know what I've never worked with a digital agency. I don't know how I think that's a hard nut to crack, combating that goal or purpose of capturing attention without doing harm. I'll leave that to you.
well, so you said the Slack on crack thing, and that really that resonated for me, because my experience with a lot of digital agencies is the adoption of digital tools, the usage of digital tools, the belief that digital tools make our lives better. And then oftentimes you run into the exact situation you're describing, where Slack becomes more of a responsibility. You don't have any time to do your work because you're spending all day in Slack, feeling like you missed something, feeling like, you have to be on top of every instant response. What I was thinking as you were talking about that was, in your experience and in your work with clients in different environments, are there any things that you, like, let's say I could give you a magic wand. Would you get rid of things like Slack? Would you get rid of certain types of distractions? Would you engineer certain things, that you definitely want to have in every organization, like block scheduling around emailing, is there anything that you would universally say this good, this bad, based upon what we've seen?
So I don't think there's anything that's universal. I think you have to design across these 5 elements that impact attention in the workspace. We've touched on culture, instant response. We've touched on tools.
Yep.
Can we get rid of shiny new tool syndrome? And for which in each team, there's also going to be a different need for what's the minimum portfolio of digital tools that we want or truly need to be in, and which are optional.
Yeah.
Because this shiny new tool syndrome is a widespread issue, especially if you're a tech company or a knowledge worker, because you love tools naturally. And so you have too much stuff. So there is, I could just say follow digital minimalism, another book by Cal Newport.
Yeah, another good one.
And just assess which are the minimum tools you need for communication, for industry specific purpose, for value creation, and then say the other ones, let's just set them aside. That is one part of the tools design, right? So I don't know if I've answered your question because it's a very long answer, because there's a unique need to design for any team or organization. What is the right design to protect attention across those 5 elements that impact our attention?
Got it. So I think one of the things that so far in this conversation is that I'm like super interested in all of this stuff, and I've taken us down a circuitous and random kind of route, and you have a very structured approach to some of these things that I think that's actually where we should double back to, which is these 5 elements of organizational attention. And I know you've kind of dropped them in to answer some of my sort of random questions about these different things, but let's kind of recenter on it. And can you take us through those 5 different components and talk a little bit about what each of them, how they each fit together to create an organization that can have a little bit more granularity and control around their attention?
Sure. So when I look at the workspace and the workplace, so space and place and humans in it, based on experience and based on a lot of research that I did during COVID, this was born during COVID. This is a COVID creation, I would say. These 5 things emerged. So, and this is based on 25 years working in professional services firms and with tech companies. So the first element that impacts our attention is our ability to focus. And again, focus being a skill. How well are we training focus ourselves in the workplace and or in the workplace? And do we know what to focus on? Have we created a value creation portfolio? Do we know our portfolio of work? Which tasks create value aligned with purpose of what the higher purpose and what the revenue purpose is of our organization or our team? And do we know how much time we should be spending on logistical transactional tasks? And to your question again, and do we block time then? If we know what our value creation portfolio is, are we blocking time to allow for the deep work that needs to happen to create that value, to create valuable assets, right? So that is focus. The second piece, so we start there because if we don't know what the value creation portfolio is, we really can't do the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And then there's the skill piece. The second one is culture. And they're all equally important, but I do think order is important in terms of design as well. Mm-hmm. So culture is a very difficult task to shift. And culture, of course, is the beliefs, the mindsets, the values, the traditions, the language, the habits, the unwritten rules in the organization. And when we ask ourselves the question, so I asked the teams the question, well, what would a team or an organization that protects and harnesses attention feel like? And what would it look like? So we get to visioning, okay, what elements of culture, what unwritten rules, what mindsets do we need to shift in order to have a culture that holds space for attention to have enough space itself to be treated as a valuable asset like money?
Let me pause you on that real quick. Very quick question. Do you find that the answers are routinely the same? Because my sense of it is like, it's sort of like when you ask, you look at like companies like values, it's like integrity, innovation. Mm-hmm. Like you tend to see the same things because I think that's what companies want in order to achieve, maximum revenue generation, et cetera, et cetera. So I would imagine that there are certain criteria that are always going to be connected to creating organizations where attention is valued.
It's often the case, but I like to take it down to, let's look at, you can have the organizational level, the team level, and the role, the job role level. So I like to challenge teams to look at the job role. And this particular job role has a unique value creation portfolio. And then the sum of those job roles that are in a team have the collective value creation portfolio. And so based on those portfolios, we get the nuances of culture design. Yes, there are shared things, but I do think it is a mistake to assume that one organization, even an organization of 20 people or 50 people, small organization, could have the exact same design, because the needs are different per job role and per team type.
Got it. And there are probably certain types of distractions that are unique to individual organizations, or certain needs that are unique to individual roles. So, okay. So I get, so there's probably, like in a Venn diagram, there's probably a bunch of overlap, but then there's a bunch of stuff that isn't. Okay, cool. Sorry. So continue the third one.
So the third one is balance. And I think if you looked at my website, you'll still see old graphics that say body wisdom. Because this is, and I've changed it to balance to be a more palatable word. To me, this is the balance in the workplace that we have between body and mind, in terms of, are we present constantly in our heads, thinking, talking, or are we present in our bodies, actually noticing things about the team, noticing things about insight, having access to wisdom rather than just intelligence. So this balance between body and mind, balance between intelligence and wisdom, and balance between the digital and the physical. And so in COVID, of course, we got out of whack because our heads are always in screens. And this balance piece, designing the right balance for particular teams, depends also on how much creative, innovative work do they need to be doing? How much collaborative work do they need to be doing? Do we have a 100% virtual team or not? Do we have a hybrid team, right? And how do we allow people rest from screens to be able to get back into the body for well-being and for innovation and for tapping into wisdom? So that's probably the most nebulous piece, where we're also intersecting with some of those things that you mentioned at the beginning, the more woo-y stuff, you might say. But I ground that in MIT's practices, which are developed at the Presencing Institute, which has this flavor of, okay, how do we innovate and create and have authentic transformation in an organization or a system, but incorporating practices that tap into the body-mind balance and the wisdom box, as well as the intelligence box, and incorporating reflective practice into that to achieve that balance, because in society, we're out of whack.
I'd imagine, so one, I really like the shift to the word balance for a variety of reasons. I also just think it communicates really well, especially since being out of balance is something that I think is so relatable in work. The second thing is, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd imagine of the five, I have them in my notes, the five, it would seem to me that this is the one that's going to be the heaviest lift, or the biggest challenge for you to get buy-in from some types of leaders. The rest of them all make perfect sense because they almost feel like they're more commonly accepted, thought about sort of things, maybe not attended to, maybe they're not paying attention to them, but they are at least more widely thought about, at least in a macro or micro level. Whereas this one was like, well, that might not have any place in the workplace, right? Like, why do we care about our mindfulness presence of let them be who they want to be, just show up and do your job, right? Like, I'd imagine this is the one that has a little bit of a wrestling that you have to do.
You are absolutely right. But this is the superpower. This is the superpower of the whole thing, because this is the most underutilized piece of design that we have in terms of tapping into collective wisdom, harnessing collective. We talk about collective intelligence, where we're harnessing data mining and data we can see, but harnessing collective wisdom is something that is very new. And yes, it is a hurdle, but it is the thing I am most passionate about because it has the quickest impact. It is actually the easiest. Once you get over the hurdle of understanding that this is actually quite normal, it's been around for thousands of years, and practices as simple as just journaling together, right? You don't have to go into the woo-woo space at all, but just drawing pictures of how you interpret a challenge and sharing those, just getting out of dialogue and into reflective practice of different flavors. It could be gameplay, like the empathy toy or the failure toy. So there are different levels of getting people into a psychologically comfortable space. The most progressive leaders will go for the whole thing and probably maybe have had experience in such practices. But yeah, it's the toughest nut to crack, but it's the fastest impact.
I'm glad you ended on that, because I was going to say, I feel like this is the one where seeing is believing happens the most quickly, right? So like you do a creativity exercise with the group, or a brainstorming exercise, or any sort of exercises like that, or even a mindfulness breathing exercise or anything like that, you immediately feel the difference. At the beginning of some meetings, a partner of mine, we have a program called Super Productive. And one of the things that we do with clients is we do a productivity power hour. And at the beginning of it, one of the things we have to really do is make sure that we get everybody in the right headspace to be in a productivity power hour. And part of that is like shedding the general, like, work, whatever, but like actually getting people to just embrace this hour, like be present in this hour to be productive, and walking people through that. Like in less than 5 minutes, you can get somebody who maybe had a full day of whatever, stress and whatever's going on, to just set that aside for the moment and really be in that meeting and be able to be productive during that time. So I completely get why that would be the heaviest lift, but also the fastest impact, and why it's so critical, especially everything that you've listed here that I have in my notes, but like interconnectedness, empathy, creativity, insight, like obviously all of that stuff is critical. So, all right. So take us through the final two. I will try to not interrupt the last two, but that
interrupt as much as you want. And thanks for that example, because that is an example of a reflective practice and why it's so powerful that you're doing in your productivity hour there.
And it takes less than 5 minutes, which is the other thing about it, is like some of this could sound like it's like, oh God, we have this whole organizational change, but it's like, no, like literally every meeting you could do 2 minutes and it would potentially change the entire course of your company.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And so happy to hear that you're doing that. The last two are the easy ones. They're the ones we can see and touch.
Yep.
We can see and touch tools. We can see and touch our physical environment, and we can touch our virtual space, right? So the tools piece we touched upon a bit. What is the tool portfolio? What do we really need? What can we pare back? Can we become digital minimalists and thus create more space and less multitasking and less notifications, et cetera? And how are we in intentional relationship with the tools then we decide to use? Do we have phones in another room when we are working or during our deep work time? Can the phone be in a completely different room? Or simple things like turning off all notifications, even on the laptop. Simple things like, stop using 10 open tabs simultaneously, on 2 screens or something. That's the whole relationship with tools, the portfolio, and how are we interacting with them. And the final one is the physical space design and the virtual space design. And the physical space design, of course, is now always shifting. And we see so many articles about these hybrid organizations. Some people are going fully remote. When you're going fully remote, what do you do? So that's very much an HR and space design driven piece as well. So I partner with people on that. I don't have detailed expertise in that physical space piece. And the virtual space is of great interest, however, because we are also creating, how do we maintain and hold space as facilitators or as leaders or as meeting organizers, even for interconnectedness online, for a video on culture or not, or when do we do video on, when do we allow the brain to rest a bit and have video off, because there's a case for both. And how do we create psychological safety in the virtual space, right? Especially in the virtual space, and inclusion and all of that. So those two, frankly, I believe are the easiest ones to tackle. And that's why I put them at the end, because if you start with most of what I see as, sort of competition, I guess, if I don't believe really in competition in this world anymore, but when you see other organizations offering similar services to mine, or that sound similar, they're mostly focused on tools and space.
Yeah. And it's the sort of thing where any productivity conversation that I've ever really been in starts first with tools. Then it might go into like strategy, like productivity strategy, but it rarely goes into the level of how are we thinking about productivity? How are we working together as a team? What are we focusing on? How are we focusing on it? All of those sorts of conversations generally get kind of left in the dust.
What's interesting though, that I have deleted the word, or I'm trying to delete the word productivity from my vocabulary and use effectiveness only, because for me, productivity treats human beings like a machine.
Yeah.
And productivity is mostly in my experience. Measure. Yeah. It's performance, it's striving, it's metrics based. And I have nothing against metrics, but can we have metrics on effectiveness, right? And productivity is getting things done. Effectiveness is getting the right things done. So when we know our purpose, when we know the value we're creating, can we set the metrics based on, oh, well, how many assets did I create this week? Not how many emails did I send, or whatever it might be. So I'm very much challenging myself and my clients to move away from this word productivity and let it evolve to the more, again, holistic or inspirational word of effectiveness, and not efficiency, right? Efficiency is doing things correctly, doing things right.
Yeah. With little waste.
These are word nuances that are really interesting, but I think they're quite powerful.
Yeah. And actually you've just gotten me thinking about the word productivity and like how I relate to it personally versus how I'm using it professionally. And I actually see exactly what you're saying. I don't really care about the quantity of your output and, the efficiency of your output so much as I care about, are you working on things that are important? Are you working on things that you care about? How do you feel? All of that sort of stuff is a lot more important to me. So I 100% buy in with that. So let me end on this question, ask you, if you could do me a favor and for the audience that's listening, describe what sort of the ideal super attention powered organization might look like. Like what does it look like when you pay attention to those 5? How might the organization approach each of those things to design the ideal workspace? What is the outcome they're looking for? Kind of just paint Camelot for us of like, you follow the advice that you're putting out here that attention is important, perhaps the most critical asset. Let's say that we buy into that and we go through the entire process of designing that workspace. What's it look like? What's the outcome?
So the outcome is an organization that is doing better work in less time. So they're high on innovation, high on well-being, and high on effectiveness without working more than 40 hours a week. And the end game is they are sustaining their market advantage with social impact, with good revenue, both, and all 3 at the same time. These 3 metrics to me are fused in one thing: innovation, high well-being, and high effectiveness. That is the outcome.
That sounds awesome. I think everybody would want that.
I do too.
Well, I think you've been a fascinating guest and really interesting to talk to you about all of these things. I'm on board with everything you're talking about, but we're coming to the end of our episode. So I want to give you a chance to just tell everyone where they can go and be social with you, where they can learn about you, download something if you've got anything for them to download, buy something if you've got something to buy. Just this is your chance for like unabashed, shameless promotion. I save it at the end so that nobody has to feel bad about it. Just go nuts.
Thank you, Jeff. So it's simple. My website is at mindequity.ca for Canada. So mindequity.ca. And on mindequity.ca, you'll see a free tool that lets you, in less than 5 minutes, assess your current state of your ability to harness attention. So it's called the Focus Scorecard, and it is 20 simple questions, and you can see where you rate in each of those 5 areas of focus, culture, balance, tools, and environment. And then you can reach out and have a discovery call. You can, what I'm also offering right now for target clients, which are knowledge worker organizations or professional services firms, is I'm testing a 50-question attention audit. So anybody who wants a 50-question attention audit, you start by doing the short one, and then you'll get to a section and it'll ask you, do you want to qualify for the attention audit? And that'll give you a report, So I put together a report on how your collective team, so that invites your team of 10 or more people to do the audit. And I give a collective response and an interactive talk as well to share back the results. And that is something that is going on currently.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I love the kind of work that you're doing. I love that you're out there doing it. I love that you're trying to address anything that makes workplace well-being more of a high priority, because I think it's about time that we have more of that focus.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for coming on. I think the episode was great. If you're listening, please go tell someone about it. Share this episode, which I guess makes this podcast, as I often say, shareable. Wait, don't leave. If you've never listened to my fancy outro, do it just once for me, please. Okay, if you enjoy Shareable and you find it valuable, there's a few ways that you can support the show. One, you can share it on social media, which I strongly encourage. I mean, it's literally the name of the show, Shareable. Two, you can review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're an Overcast user, as many of my listeners are, make sure to click that star button on the episodes that you like. The third way that you can support the show is by blogging about it or discussing it on your own podcast, or even by making a YouTube video where you talk about one of the episodes. And then the final way that you can support the show is by supporting it directly on Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. Now, before I let you go, I want to tell you about one other thing. You see, Shareable is just one of many projects that I'm working on at any given time. I've got another podcast called Rogue. I do a live streaming show every week called The Heroic Council. I've got a blog where I release a blog post twice a week. And if you're looking to keep up with all sorts of different content that can help you grow and become a superhero in life, I want you to check out jeffgibbard.me. That's where I list all of my current projects and projects that are coming up in the future, including my forthcoming book, The Lovable Leader. It would mean a lot to me if you could go and check out some of the other things I've worked on, because I put just as much of my heart into those projects as I do into Shareable. Thank you so much for being a listener. Thank you for being a supporter, and I hope to see you here on the next episode of Shareable.